Hey all my people, how you doing? I hope you're having a damn good day. Welcome back to the channel, and today we will be discussing De Zerbi's 4-2-3-1 formation. Now, I have done this already for FIFA 23, but a few people have been saying, we want the updated version, we want the new signings in, and of course he has more or less tinkered with the formation. Of course it is going to be a 4-2-3-1, but he has more or less altered it a little bit and you know, changed a few things. And I was watching that, the previous one that I did make, and I was like, you know what? Like, these tactics are pretty much bang on, except for like a few things. So we will be going through that, of course. If you haven't seen that other video, of course, it is more or less along the same lines as this. But if you would like to have a look at it, it's just like a variation to these tactics. If you might want to incorporate it in a career mode or so on, feel free. I will link that video at the end of this one. But right now, we're going to go through the team, of course. We've got Welbeck, Inacio, March, Matoma up front. By the way, Matoma against Wolves. Whew, that first goal. Damn. We've got Gilmore in the number 11 spot, of course, or he's got the number 11 jersey, I should say. We've got Gross, we've got Milner, who starts off as a right back. This is more or less where he started for Wolves, of course. We've got Webster, Steele, Dunk, and Estupinian. Of course, on the bench as the substitutes, we've got Ferguson, João Pedro, who I rate incredibly highly. I'm so happy that he's gone to a place like Brighton. You know, there are those teams that you just want young players to go to because you know they will develop. And I mean, like the likes of Pellistri at Manchester United, I know he might not be loaned out, or he might be, but if he is loaned out, I would want him to go to a place like a Burnley or a Brighton, for example, because those places, those teams, those managers, they instill a great foundation for the young talent going forward, and you know, they build on that, they develop the talent. And of course, they play good football, and that's what you want. So I'm very happy that he's gone to the likes of Brighton. Of course, we've got Lana, we've got Dahoud, one of my favourite Dortmund players. I really did want Manchester United to sign this guy, but it just wasn't to be. Anyways, we've got Verbruggen, of course, the new signing, the new number 1 for Brighton, of course, but he didn't play, he hasn't been playing yet. I think, you know, De Zerbi's more or less looking how he works out with the team and so on. Of course, we've got Igor, another fantastic signing, and then, of course, we've got Veltman, and then in the reserves, we've got Modder, we've got Lamptey, another great young new signing, of course, a Dingara or a Dingra or something like that. You know, I don't. These names they do tend to tongue twist me. And then of course we've got Van Heck, and then a few others. That's, you know, they're getting there. They're young talents at Brighton, so there'll be something special someday. But more or less, this is the formation I've gone with. As you can see here, it is a 4-2-3-1 wide formation. Now, basically, what I did do was, there's 2 DMs. Of course, I've just made them slightly wider. Of course, the fullbacks, they are hugging the touchline. But other than that, it is just a basic 4-2-3-1. 1 goalkeeper, 2 centre-backs, 2 fullbacks, 2 DMs, 1 cam, 2 wide midfielders, and of course 1 striker. So, of course, with the tactics going forward, Roberto De Zerbi likes to implement a press in it. It's a very high press all the time, trying to make it a very constant thing. And I did note down that with that other video, I did say it was a constant press, and it is a fairly accurate judgment to make. But of course, in FIFA 23, goodness me, do you get screwed over royally with the likes of constant press, or constant pressure. So I've gone and just changed it a little bit and more or less moved it to a press after loss of possession. It makes more sense, and of course Brighton do tend to like implement that with goalkeeper restarts, of course, you know, throw-ins and so on. So they do try and work as hard off the ball as what they do when they have it in their possession. As for the width, though, it is set to 25. So of course I did note that, you know, the 2 defensive midfielders, they are very widespread, and that's more or less for the offensive build-up play going forward. Of course, a nice widespread midfield. I've set it to 25 to try and bring those 2 guys specifically, and of course your 2 centre-backs that are playing just behind them. It's more or less to try and make that as narrow as possible and bring them in and make it a nice solid shape going forward, or I should say going backwards. And then as for the depth, of course, Flippin' Brighton play an incredibly nice high line, very structurally sound with it. Of course, that back line very rarely make mistakes. Of course, there's the odd mistake here and there, but in real life, they look to implement that system very well, and that's why I've gone with an 85 high line. Now, in FIFA 23, of course, Brighton don't have the best rated players, so you can get caught out quite easily. I mean, against Wolves, it was quite tough from certain moments in the gameplay, of course, but it does work out, and it does more or less look to try and recreate and replicate that nice high line. So you can have the likes of Dunk or Eagle or whoever you have as your centre backs. It does help them, try and win the ball back as high as possible. If the ball is hoofed up the field, they'll try and win it back with a nice early dominant header and then circulate it back into possession. As for the offense, it is set to slow build up and possession-based chance creations. Of course, it goes without saying, De Zerbi and Brighton, they look to try and implement and impose themselves on the opposition with, of course, the ball and making sure that they can play out from the back. Of course, the likes of Steele, Verbruggen, they're both really good goalkeepers with the ball at their feet, finding passes, finding little chip shots and so on. Really, really good with that. And of course, it goes without saying, De Zerbi, from day dot, he really did come in and say, listen, you have the foundations from what Graham Potter's laid, but we're going to, more or less level up that and just take it to the next level. And they really, really have done such a fantastic job with that. As for the width, it's set to 75. Now, I did say, the natural shape of the team going forward is very wide, and you want to try and more or less look to play on that and get it even a bit wider to allow your opposition to try and be as stretched as possible. Of course, that midfield of the opposition, if it's stretched nicely, of course, it allows more space for Matoma to come inside, operate with. Of course, the likes of Inacio, whoever you have as a striker, it does allow them to have a bit more space and time, if they do have the ball, to then more or less string together a few passes and move the ball further forward. As for players in the box, it is set to 7. You don't want to overcommit too many players because it is a fairly high line. So I've gone with 7. Of course, you can go with 8 if you are maybe chasing a game, or even 9. But 7 is a nice happy medium. And then as for corners and free kicks, it is set to 4. So just having a look at the instructions, of course, the goalkeeper still very good with the ball at his feet. And of course, I did mention earlier that De Zerbi likes to have a goalkeeper that has the ability to play out from the back, starting the offense from the goalkeeper, of course. So he is set to be a sweeper keeper and, of course, come for crosses. He does do a fairly good job. And might I say, I did not realize he was 32 years old. Like, that's very impressive that he's just managed to, have this ability. And as his career's gone by, nobody's ever really picked up on it. And then De Zerbi comes in, and 1, 2, 3, he's starting. Robert Sanchez has gone to Chelsea, and you know what? De Zerbi was like, that's fine. We've got Steele, and we're bringing in Verbruggen. Fantastic. And you know what? I take my hat off to him. He is a fantastic goalkeeper. Moving slightly higher up the field, of course, we've got Dunk and Webster. They are set to their base set of instructions. As you can see here with Dunk and Webster, if it allows me to get there. There we go, base set of instructions. But as you can also see and tell, I did forget to mention this, but I have dropped them down quite a bit to try and be as deep as possible. So it does allow for Steele to have a bit of an outlet or get out of jail free card, essentially, by having Webster and Dunk so close to him. So if you are playing out from the back and you are being pressed, they will always be as close to the goalkeeper as possible. So if Steele is being pressed, he can more or less have a little get out of jail free card with the likes of a nice little pass to Webster and Dunk, and then they can look to drop their shoulder, and run it on into the midfield, or potentially lay it off to another player. As for James Milner, so slightly differing roles for the fullbacks. Now this might change depending on if you have Lamptey or not. If you have Lamptey, of course, with the former set of instructions, I would say go with those. But because it's James Milner and he's not really going to look to bomb on nearly half as much as what Lamptey would, I've gone with more or less a balanced attack and, of course, an inverted fullback. So he will look to try and link up with the midfield, more or less create overloads in that area and try and look to obviously assist with the build-up play in the center of the park, opposed to having a bombing on overlapping fullback in what Lamptey would normally produce. And then as for Estupinian, he is set to join the attack and overlap, so he will be the bombing on outlet on that left-hand side, also helping create space for Matoma, who, by the way, I know I've already mentioned this, but against Wolves, that first goal was fantastic, but just overall, his ability with the ball at his feet, he's got a damn PhD in how to dribble a football. Like, smash a like just for that, please. Just low-key claiming other people's achievements here. So yes, Estupinian, he's going to bomb on and overlap, of course. Then we've got Billy Gilmore, one of the two DMs. He's set to cut passing and step back while attacking, deep lying playmaker, and then of course cover the wing. So more or less he's going to try and shield that back line as much as possible and as best as possible. He is going to look to try and spray those balls out wide to the likes of March, Matoma, Inacio, and of course your striker up front. So more or less he will also try and drop between the two defenders, collect the ball, and then hopefully spray it on and progress the ball forward. As for Pascal Gross, he is set to cut passing lanes, aggressive interceptions are set to be on, and of course cover the wing and then drift wide. So if Milner is out of position, Pascal Gross, who I have noted in the past, he can play more or less anywhere. He can play as an attacking midfielder, a DM, a right back, a left back, a winger. He is the jack of all trades, master of none. But in this situation, he will look to try and assist James Milner if he is out of position on that right-hand side. Moving on forward though, as to Ignacio, he is set to come back on defense, and of course aggressive interceptions. The others are very much, we'll see how it goes throughout the course of the game. He could make runs into the box, he could hang in and around the box, he could look to drift wide, he could look to have a free roll. It's a nice little dynamic approach that I do like implementing in my systems. And of course it does add a bit more of a human touch to it. Of course we are trying to replicate and recreate FIFA 23's best set of tactics from real life experience. But basically, you do want him to come back on defense, more or less looking to draw the opposition out. Maybe if there is a centre-back attached to him, that's the guy you're supposed to mark, he will look to try and draw that centre-back out and create more space for your striker. Or more times than not, he will look to try and link up the play between the midfield and the offense going forward. So him dropping into that midfield area does help quite a bit, especially if you are being overrun in your two DMs. Need a bit more of an outlet ball, he can be that guy. And then of course the aggressive interceptions, he will look to try and lead the line, the counter press with the likes of Welbeck, of course, and more or less from a more central area. So if the ball's already progressed past the defense and into the midfield, he will look to try and press as high and wide as possible. Speaking of wide, we've got Solly March here set to come back on defense, stay wide, have a balanced support, and then of course get into the box. So he will look to make angled runs as per always, but more importantly he will look to help the likes of James Milner more or less track back, maybe pick up the fullback from time to time, but more importantly he is set to stay wide, so you want him to more or less stay up and hug that right hand side, that touch line, of course, create 1v1 situations, and also allow for the likes of Ignacio to more or less operate slightly further ahead of him, or look to try and link up with Ignacio with the little 1-2 pass here and there, and try and create 1v1 situations for himself, and also try and take out the opposition fullback out of the game. And then as for Mitoma, he is set to come back on defense, free roam, of course a balanced support with his supporting runs, and then of course get into the box, so he will look to also make angled runs into the back post. More importantly, he's going to try and help Estupiñán, who is going to be bombing on forward a lot more. But this is the main thing, this is the one thing that has changed from the previous set of instructions, or there have been actually a few tweaks here and there. But more importantly, he is set to, have a bit of a freer role on that left-hand side, so he's not going to always look to try and hug the touchline and, create 1v1 situations. He will look to come inside a bit more, show for the ball, pick up the little pockets of space, operate in those little pockets of space, and just create havoc for the opposition. One thing that I would suggest you do, you want to try and collect the ball deep and then run at the opposition in a 1v1 situation. Learn your dribble moves, especially with Mitoma. He is a fantastic player with his ability and the ball at his feet. So yeah, more or less, if you want to try and, be as accurate and as, realistic, Mitoma, pick up the ball deep, run at the opposition fullback, and then just create so much problems for the opposition going forward. And then speaking of going forward, we've got Danny Welbeck, or it could be João Pedro, or it could be, Evan Ferguson, either one. He is set to stay central, so he will look to try and occupy that central area, of course getting behind. Now I think for more or less Evan Ferguson, it will change to a bit more of a mixed attack, because of course he is quite a strong man, or boy I should say, he's still very young. But more or less for Danny Welbeck and João Pedro, they do have a bit of pace on them. So getting behind, try and stretch that back line, try and stretch that defense. And then, of course, he is set to stay forward. Now, of course, he will be an outlet ball. He will look to try and create little 1-2 passes, fire balls around the corner. On for runners, of course, you want the likes of Ignacio, Mitoma, of course, Solly March to all link up with your striker going forward. And that works out quite well with this set of instructions. Now, that is my set of Brighton Tactics 2.0 for FIFA 23. If you have enjoyed it, hit the like button, subscribe if you are new. Maybe hit one of those videos over there. That would be absolutely fantastic. Of course, the road to 2,000 subscribers is on.